Africa, a continent of immense potential, finds itself at the heart of a burgeoning rivalry between two global giants, the United States and China. This rivalry is not just a fleeting moment in history, but a significant chapter that could redefine the global order. This competition, primarily economic and political in nature, has profound implications for the future of the African continent. The stakes are incredibly high, with both superpowers vying for influence through investments, trade agreements, and strategic partnerships. Understanding the dynamics of this rivalry is crucial for comprehending the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead for Africa. The continent is rich in resources, both natural and human, making it a focal point for international interests. This rivalry is not merely about economic indicators or military might. It extends to technological advancements, educational exchanges, and cultural diplomacy. Both the US and China are keen on establishing their soft power in Africa, aiming to win the hearts and minds of its people. It is about shaping narratives, winning hearts and minds, and ultimately influencing the trajectory of a continent on the rise. The cultural exchanges, media influence, and educational programs are all part of a broader strategy to embed themselves in the African social fabric. As we delve deeper into the intricacies of this complex relationship, it is essential to remember that Africa is not a passive bystander in this geopolitical chess game. African nations are increasingly asserting their sovereignty and making strategic choices that reflect their own interests and aspirations. African nations are actively engaging with both the US and China, leveraging their agency to secure the best possible outcomes for their citizens. They are negotiating deals, setting terms, and ensuring that their partnerships are mutually beneficial. The choices African nations make in navigating this rivalry will have significant and lasting consequences for generations to come. These decisions will shape the economic landscape, social structures, and political frameworks of the continent, influencing its path towards development and prosperity. To truly grasp the significance of the US-China rivalry in Africa, one must look back at the continent's history. Africa's past is a tapestry woven with the threads of ancient civilizations, colonial conquests, and the struggle for independence. The echoes of European colonialism, with its scramble for resources and territorial control, resonate in the present. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, where European powers divided Africa without regard for ethnic or cultural boundaries, set the stage for decades of exploitation and conflict. This historical context sheds light on the complexities of the current geopolitical landscape. The fight for independence in the mid-20th century was a monumental struggle as African nations sought to reclaim their sovereignty and identity. The legacy of colonialism left deep scars on the African continent, shaping its political, economic, and social fabric. Colonial powers imposed artificial borders, disrupting traditional societies and economies. The arbitrary borders drawn during the colonial era continue to fuel conflicts, while the extractive economic systems put in place have hindered sustainable development. These borders often split ethnic groups and created landlocked countries, leading to ongoing disputes and tensions. The US-China rivalry, though different in nature, evokes memories of this troubled past. Both nations are vying for influence through investments, infrastructure projects, and trade agreements reminiscent of the colonial scramble for Africa. It raises concerns about neo-colonialism, where powerful nations seek to exert influence and control over less powerful ones, often for their own benefit. African leaders and citizens are wary of repeating history, striving to ensure that partnerships with foreign powers are equitable and beneficial for their own development. The military dimension of the US-China rivalry in Africa is increasingly evident. This competition is not just about economic influence or political alliances. It has a significant military component that is shaping the strategic landscape of the continent. China's growing military footprint on the continent has raised eyebrows in Washington, prompting a re-evaluation of US strategy in the region. The Chinese military presence is not limited to mere training exercises. It includes substantial investments in military infrastructure and technology transfers. China's military engagement in Africa is multifaceted, encompassing arms sales, military training, and joint exercises with African forces. These activities are designed to strengthen military ties and enhance the capabilities of African armies, making them more reliant on Chinese support. One of the most significant developments is the establishment of China's first overseas military base in Djibouti. This base serves as a strategic foothold in the region, allowing China to project power and protect its interests in the Horn of Africa and beyond. This assertive posture is seen by some as a sign of China's growing global ambitions and its desire to project power beyond its borders. The presence of Chinese warships and military personnel in Africa is a clear indication of Beijing's intent to play a more prominent role on the global stage. The US, while maintaining a significant military presence in Africa, has adopted a different approach. American military activities are often centered around building partnerships with African nations and providing support for peacekeeping missions. Its focus has primarily been on counterterrorism operations, particularly in regions grappling with extremist groups. The US has been involved in training African forces to combat terrorism and insurgency, aiming to stabilize volatile regions and prevent the spread of extremist ideologies. However, the US has also been criticized for its drone strikes and support for authoritarian regimes in the name of security. These actions have sometimes led to civilian casualties and have sparked protests and anti-American sentiment in various parts of Africa. The complex dynamics of US-China military maneuvers in Africa continue to evolve, with both powers seeking to secure their interests in this strategically important continent. The economic front is perhaps where the US-China rivalry in Africa is most pronounced. Both nations are actively courting African countries with promises of investment, trade, and development assistance. China's economic engagement with Africa has been nothing short of remarkable. It has become Africa's largest trading partner, investing heavily in infrastructure projects such as roads, railways, and ports. The US, while lagging behind China in terms of investment volume, has sought to differentiate itself by emphasizing good governance, transparency, and sustainable development. It has promoted initiatives such as the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which provides preferential trade access to US markets for eligible African countries. Winning hearts and minds, the battle for public opinion. The US-China rivalry in Africa is not just about hard power and economic clout. It is also about soft power and winning the hearts and minds of the African people. China has been remarkably successful in cultivating a positive image in many African countries. Its no-strings-attached approach to development assistance, coupled with its cultural diplomacy efforts, has resonated with many Africans. The US, on the other hand, has struggled to shake off the perception that it is more interested in exploiting Africa's resources than in genuinely partnering with African nations. The legacy of colonialism and US foreign policies in other parts of the world continue to cast a long shadow. The debt trap dilemma: development or dependence. One of the most contentious issues surrounding China's engagement in Africa is the so-called debt trap diplomacy. Critics argue that China is saddling African countries with unsustainable debt, potentially leading to a loss of sovereignty and control over strategic assets. China has dismissed these accusations as Western propaganda, pointing to the tangible benefits its investments have brought to African countries. It argues that its loans are provided on favorable terms and are helping to address Africa's infrastructure gap. The US has been vocal in its criticism of China's lending practices, urging African countries to exercise caution and to prioritize transparency and sustainability in their borrowing. Charting the future. Navigating the rivalry's impact. The US-China rivalry in Africa presents both opportunities and challenges for the continent. On the one hand, African countries can leverage this competition to attract investment, secure better trade deals, and advance their development agendas. On the other hand, there is a risk of becoming overly reliant on either the US or China, potentially undermining African agency and leading to a new form of dependency. African nations must carefully navigate this complex geopolitical landscape, pursuing their own strategic interests and ensuring that their voices are heard on the global stage. A continent at a crossroads. Africa stands at a crossroads, its future uncertain but full of promise. The US-China rivalry, while presenting challenges, also offers a unique opportunity for the continent to assert its agency and shape its own destiny. African nations must prioritize good governance, invest in human capital, and promote regional integration to unlock their full potential. By doing so, they can harness the benefits of this rivalry while mitigating the risks. The world is watching, and the stakes are high. A call for African agency. Ultimately, the future of Africa will be determined by Africans themselves. The US-China rivalry is but one factor shaping the continent's trajectory. African nations must resist the temptation to be drawn into a zero-sum game, instead opting for a pragmatic approach that prioritizes their own interests. This is a time for Africa to embrace its agency, to speak with a united voice, and to chart a course that leads to a brighter future for all its people. The world is watching, and the time for Africa to shine is now.